Hello everybody to this volcano review. Now the very first thing what I'm going to ask you to do is pause this video and open up your Schoology. Study your Schoology. Go over Schoology. In class you were able to use your notes, you could use your readings. I even helped a few students out here and there. But what I would ask you to do is retake it. I've already recorded your score, especially if I named off your name in class or read off your name in class. So what I'd like you to try and do it without your notes. See if you can get them all right. And if you can get them all right, that's a huge part to doing well on a test. Now in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at the short answer question. And here's one of them. Explain what role basaltic magma has in the formation of the Hawaiian Islands. How does the basaltic magma influence the type of volcano the Hawaiian Islands are and their shape? So if you remember, the Hawaiian Islands were a hotspot, and they're basically made out of basaltic magma. And this has a huge influence on the shape of the Hawaiian Islands. So the basaltic magma that created the Hawaiian Islands is being pushed up through a hotspot vent at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. And if we remember, we talked about the Hawaiian Islands. If you go down to the bottom of the ocean floor, all the way to the top of the Hawaiian Islands, they're actually, if you look at the whole thing as a whole, the whole island is just one large volcano. It's actually taller than Mount Everest. Mount Everest is the tallest mountain above sea level, but from the sea floor up, the Hawaiian Islands are actually larger. And because they are made up of basaltic magma, it says the basaltic magma is very fluid due to its low silica content. And for that reason, that magma, when it comes out, it's going to spread out. And you're not going to have these huge steep cones that you might see in other volcanoes, like Mount St. Helens, Paracutine, Mount Shasta, Mount Hood, Mount Fujiyama if you go to Japan. But because it's going to spread out, it's going to be very broad, very large, and much flatter. So that's why we can go vacationing on the Hawaiian Islands, even though they're a volcano. If they would have been a cinder cone or a composite cone, there's no way you'd be able to vacation on there. Everything would be way too steep. So there's a lot of fluid, when it says right here, because it's so fluid, it has a tendency to create gentle eruptions that allow the lava to flow out instead of blowing up violently. Therefore, the resulting shield volcano created are very tall and wide. So, do you have any questions with that? And I would suggest you come in school early, the day before the test, if you have any questions, because I'll make sure I put aside some time to help you out if you have any questions on any of these. Now the next question that's going to be on a test. Explain 3 ways in which earthquake movements and or volcanic activity may impact society. And this is one of those things. First of all, let me grab a pen here. This is one of the things that some of you struggle with at times. And that's reading. Notice this says explain. It doesn't say list. It says explain. So I listed them. I'm not going to go into great detail. I'll talk about each one, but what you need to remember to do is you need to remember to explain. If you don't remember to explain, you're not going to get full credit. You'll get some credit, but if you explain yourself, you're going to get even more credit. So here's one of the things I listed. Damage to structures. For example, freeways, bridges, buildings, homes, water and gas lines, electric lines. So let's just pick one of these. Let's say damage to structures, and you might even write damage to structures such as water and gas lines. And then just explain, because of the earthquake shaking and there's movement going on within the earth, the water lines will rupture or the gas lines will rupture. Freeways and bridges may collapse as a result of the ground shaking. So you just need to explain yourself a little bit more. Exactly what do you mean? You can't just say freeways or freeways fall. Freeways fall because of the shaking of the earth, the vibrations within the earth. So you need to be a little bit more specific. Here's some other things you can write about. Social and community challenges. So you, again, explain 3 ways in which earthquakes, movement, and or volcanic activity may impact society. So let's talk about volcanoes. Well, you may say, well, there's a lack of food in the area because the volcano, when it erupted, released a lot of ash, which landed in the farmlands, and thus the local farmers weren't able to grow food. And this may not have a huge impact on the United States because we are a large country. we have a lot of resources. But if you're a smaller, impoverished country, that may have a huge impact. So I didn't just say lack of food or starvation. I explained how that happened. Job losses. Don't just say, losing jobs. Say, well, job losses may result or impact society as a result of an earthquake because a lot of factories, a lot of roads, a lot of infrastructure will be destroyed as a result of an earthquake. And we definitely saw that in Haiti. Again, we can talk about water, and it kind of relates to this back up here again, where water lines may be ruptured as a result of the ground shaking. Delayed flights. Europe actually shut down a few years ago when there was a giant volcanic eruption in Iceland, and it sent up so much ash the planes couldn't fly over most of Europe for several days. So this is a pretty easy question, but make sure you explain. So what I'd like you to do to practice this is practice coming up with 3 on your own. Maybe have mom or dad write the 3 down, have them choose, and see if you can come up with a good explanation, because the explanation is going to be huge when it comes to this question. Now the last question is, and I'm going to read it right off the test, explain the relationship between plate tectonics, earthquakes, and volcanoes. Now we've already tested on earthquakes, and this is the volcanoes test. But this test is also going to be tying all of them together, because there is a connection between the 3. So it says, explain the relationship between plate tectonics, earthquakes, and volcanoes. So this first one is going to be explain how earthquakes and volcanoes are related. So that's 2 of the 3. Well, earthquakes are often a precursor of volcanic activity. Rarely do volcanoes just erupt without anybody knowing they're going to erupt. Usually as magma is working itself into the different chambers and the pressure is building, the magma is rising within the volcanoes. Typically you're going to get earthquakes as a result. So earthquakes are often a precursor to volcanic activity. In other words, earthquakes typically happen before a volcanic activity or an eruption occurs. Now the next question, explain how plate tectonics create earthquakes. Well, think back to the plate tectonics unit. When the plates push against each other, remember, they can come together, they can move apart, or they can slide past each other. All these activities, all this interaction between the plates is going to create friction. And it's this friction that's going to create the earthquakes. So when the plates push together at convergent boundaries, the compression forces create earthquakes. When the plates pull apart at divergent plate boundary, remember, it's the tension force being pulled apart. You're going to have that snapping of the rock, that when the rock reaches its elastic limit, that's going to create earthquakes. And then finally, if they're sliding past each other, again, you're going to have these huge masses of rock. They're not going to slide by each other without any friction. And when they get caught, they're going to stop, and all of a sudden snap. Then you're going to get the earthquakes. And the last part of this question is explaining how plate tectonics are related to volcanoes. So we related earthquakes to volcanoes and earthquakes to plate tectonics. Now the last part is to explain how plate tectonics create volcanoes. Well, when a plate boundary creates a subduction zone at a convergent plate boundary, the compression force creates stress fractures in the other plates. And as the plates go into the mantle, the magma is forced up through the fracture/cracks to create volcanoes. At a divergent plate boundary, the plates are pulled apart, leaving a void that is filled by magma that may be created from a volcano. And I know some of you might be looking at this explanation and saying, what? Well, think about it. You have a plate here. And let's say this is a continental plate. And if you have another plate coming in, if this is the oceanic plate, remember the oceanic plate is going to be subducted underneath. And the reason for that is because it is more what? Do you remember? It's more dense. And what you have here is you have a subduction zone. And this is where you tend to have your trenches. Now, as this plate descends down into the mantle, it's going to be heated up. And typically your less dense magma is going to start to melt, and it's going to find its way through the cracks and structures, and it's going to create volcanoes that are going to erupt. That's why where you have the North American plate, I'll write North American plate, and you have the Pacific plate coming together, the Pacific plate is descending down, or this could be the Juan de Fuca plate. It's descending down underneath the North American plate. This is why you have mountains like Mount St. Helens at the boundary. You tend not to have these in the middle of plates unless you have a hot spot. You tend to have volcanoes along the edges of plates because when these plates are subducting, you have the magma rising up. So simplified answer, how are they related? Well, at plate boundaries, where you have an oceanic plate descending down underneath the North American plate, as the oceanic plate starts to melt, the less dense material will find its way up to the surface, creating volcanoes. So this has been a review of the volcanoes test. I've gone through all the short answer questions. And again, don't forget to look at Schoology. If you can answer all the questions at Schoology, you'll do good. If you can answer all these as well, you'll do great. In fact, I'm going to recant a little bit. On 1LT, in fact, I'll show you the test. It's right here. You can't see it all, but for this part right here, these are all short answer questions. So on one side of the test, you have to do well on the short answer questions. Now the other test, there's just one short answer question. I'm not going to tell you which one, but you need to do good on the other stuff as well as this one down here. But for the one side, you have to do well on the short answer questions. If short answer questions is not your forte, or if you're not good at it, you're going to have to practice several times. So as always, if you have any questions, any concerns, please stop in and talk to me in class. Thanks. Bye.